Okay, so take your notebooks out from last time. If you weren't here last time, there's a recording of last week's lecture that Mr. Bueno has that you'll have access to, right? I'm going to go through some of these slides pretty quickly because most of this you have. If you don't have it, like I said, we do have a recording of it for you. Last time we talked about the Imago Dei. Who remembers what the Imago Dei is? Okay, so this is where you can look at your notes from last time because you probably haven't looked at them since a week ago. So turn back a page or two. What is the Imago Dei? Mm-hmm.
It's the concept that we understand that man was created in the image and likeness of God.
Good. So it's the idea that man is created in the image and likeness of God, right? And we talked about where it comes from. That it's rooted in Scripture in Genesis, right? We talked about Michelangelo's fresco. We did a little virtual tour to the Vatican, which hopefully you enjoyed. We talked about the fact that God brings order out of chaos, creates us out of love, and gives us dominion over the fish and the birds of the air, right? All that stuff. Did we get to this last time?
Yes.
What do you have last in your notes? Okay. We talked about human dignity, right, which was possibly on your quiz from last week. I think we're right about here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we began to talk about this last time. When we talk about the moral life, the moral world, we have to keep everything in perspective. So, we have to recognize that we use things and that we love people. All right? We use things and we love people. I would say that the majority of the time when we find ourselves falling into sin, it's because we flopped or we flipped this using things and loving people, and we begin to love things and use people. Not just others, but even ourselves, right? So if we're going to fall into a sin of like self-gratification, if we're going to harm ourselves, if we're going to do something to us, it's not because we love ourselves, but because we begin to use ourselves, right? And when we are obsessed with money, or when we're obsessed with power, when we're obsessed with, I'm part of this team or that team, I'm part of this group or that group, we're not loving other people or loving ourselves, we're using ourselves or using other people. All right? So when we disorder the natural order of things and people, using things and loving people, that is most often when we get ourselves in trouble. That makes sense? You probably think about even in your own life examples of when you use someone rather than love them, you get yourself in trouble. And not trouble as in like you get called down to the principal's office, but trouble in that you begin to see like the relationship you have with that person is diminished, or how you interact with these people are diminished because they recognize that you're just using them to get ahead or to get something, right? So I want you to write these two questions down in your notes. How do you experience the Imago Dei, and how can you better live out the Imago Dei? Right? Write them down. I'm not going to ask you to answer these right now, but at some point in the future on a quiz or an exam or something, I would expect you to be able to answer one of these two questions. How do I experience the Imago Dei, or how do I better live out? How can I better live this out? All right, now I will warn you, and my grandfather, if he were still here today, would absolutely agree with this. Right? I learned from the best. I can sniff out BS from a mile away. So do not, if and when you see one of these two questions on a quiz or exam, do not give me what you think I want you to write down. Give me what you want to write down. Okay? So don't just redefine Imago Dei and tell me it comes from the Latin word Imago Dei and that it's a theological concept. Don't do that. All right? Don't give me what you think I want. I want to know what you think. All right? The only way you're going to get this question wrong is if you just don't try or don't do it. So even if you honestly write this question, and in the question you say, Mr. Wehr, I have no idea how the Imago Dei, I experienced this in my life. right? I would probably pull you aside and ask you to think a little harder, but that's not wrong. Okay? So I can sniff out BS from a mile away because I've been there, done that. I know how to put, a nice 3 or 4 sentence little answer on a test to make it seem like I know what's going on. All right? So please don't do that. So the real question that was asked first period, how do we experience this idea of the Imago Dei? How do we experience this idea of the Imago Dei? Tell me verbally, how would you answer this question? Or if you don't like the first one, how would you answer the second one? Yes?
I think the second one would probably be trying to live how we in the Bible, or trying to be a better person.
Okay, so trying to be a better person, maybe trying to recognize the good in someone else, rather than jump right to the conclusion of this person always is coming after me, or this person always is negative.
I would
Right.
open-minded.
Maybe be more open-minded, okay? How else?
I feel like you have to be patient.
Okay, so patience. So maybe because of the fact that we're all created in God's image and likeness, we're called to be patient with each other. And even though we might get on each other's nerves, we have to at least be respectful enough to hear someone out. Even if we disagree with them or we think they're wrong, we should be patient with them and let them speak their piece. Right? Good. So that would be a good example. Okay. Any questions? This stuff is very important. All right. And why? Because when we're going to talk about morality, when we're going to talk about these different ideas, these different concepts, these different topics, if we don't all have the same foundation, we don't all have the same starting ground, it's not going to go well. Okay? So, and in some sense, I do recognize that I'm asking you to kind of swim upstream. What do I mean by that? Well, the world that we live in, our generation that we live in, we define people based on these things, right? And you might want to write this down. Right? Our generation, we tend to define people based on their opinions, based on how they feel, based on if we agree or disagree with them, and based on where they stand on issues that we think are important or that we don't think are important. Right? And so the world that we live in wants to say that this kind of doesn't exist anymore. They cut the idea of the human person out of the whole discussion. And we look at someone and we say, well, I don't like you because you think that the Denver Broncos were the best team in the NFL, and I think that the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So I don't like him anymore, and I'm going to treat him like junk now because I disagree. You're an Eagles fan? I remember. It's fun when I can pick on people and remember what they gave me crap for being a Cowboys fan.
I think I do remember that.
You remember that whole thing now? Okay. So as soon as I disagree with him, I'm done, right? It's not that I stand up and go on this theological rant of how he's not a person anymore. That's not happening. But what is happening is the fact that I'll write him off completely and say, well, I disagree with him, so I'm done with him. Right? I mean, we do this all the time. The same is true for issues. Well, she is a complete super ultra conservative, and I'm the complete opposite. I consider myself a free-thinking liberal, or I'm a libertarian, I'm a progressive, I'm an independent. I'm not even going to associate with her because she's crazy. Right? She's a gun-toting, Bible-thumping crazy. Or on the other side, right? He's way too liberal for me. He's nuts, right? He just wants, free education and wants to go smoke pot legally in all 50 states. I'm not even going to go anywhere near that, right? So we pigeonhole people based on their opinions, on the issues, on where they stand. And we forget to recognize that they're human people, right? They're human persons. This week in history, something significant happened. Who died? Oh, gosh. This happened last class. So it's funny because you probably could tell me a lot about Kanye and Taylor Swift right now.
The judge's daughter would like to
after this.
You could tell me a lot about Kanye and Taylor Swift, but somebody very important died this week, right?
I could tell you a lot.
Something or something.
I don't know if it's that this week.
Who died this past week?
Mom was.
Who died?
The last conservative Supreme Court.
Very good. So Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, right? He was super Catholic. His son is a Catholic priest, right? He was very conservative, but he was superly Catholic, superly faithful, okay? And I bring him up not because of where he stood on issues of the law, but I think something that he said about his job as a Supreme Court Justice applies to our discussion, right? So he said this. This is Justice Scalia. I attack ideas. I don't attack people. And some very good people have some very bad ideas. And if you can't separate the two, you got to get another day job. Right? So what is he saying as a Supreme Court Justice? Sometimes we have to recognize that there's a difference between acceptance and respect. Right? We don't always have to accept someone's opinion. We don't always have to go along with someone's opinion or someone's way of thinking, but we always have to respect them. If you're into politics or into the legal system, somebody who is on the complete opposite side of Justice Scalia would be Justice Ruth Ginsburg. Right? And at the news of his passing, she said that she was so distraught that her good friend, Antonin Scalia, had died. Even though they disagreed on just about every Supreme Court justice case that came to the Supreme Court, she loved him as a friend. She truly recognized him as a human person, and even though they never agreed, as far as I know, in their time spent on this, they never agreed, she was able to recognize him as a person, and he the same way. That's how they were, even though they had polar opposite opinions, they became and respect each other and were very good friends. All right? This is important when we talk about the moral life and the ethical life. Why? Because there's a big difference between acceptance and respect. Okay? Any questions? Any questions? Do we understand this, the idea of acceptance versus the idea of respect? Yes, no. Some of you say yes, some of you are looking at me like maybe not. Yes?
So you saying we don't have to accept them and respect their opinions?
Yeah, we don't have to, acceptance in the sense of we don't have to necessarily go along with what everyone always says. But we should be able to not just respect their opinion, but respect them as a person. So for instance, you might think that what I'm saying up here is complete hogwash, right? But you still have an obligation to respect me. Why? Not because I'm dressed like a priest, not because I'm a seminarian and come here on a Thursday, because I'm a person. The same way I might think that, someone in the back of the room is sleeping, or someone in the back of the room is on their phone, or reading something, or doodling during class, right? I'm not going to call them out and belittle them in front of the whole group. I'm going to be respectful, even though they're being disrespectful back, right? It's not like I have to go off on the side and start doodling on a notebook. But I'm called to be respectful to them. So this is where we kind of get ourselves in trouble sometimes, because we don't distinguish between acceptance and respect. We can disagree with someone and still respect them. And then there are times where we can accept not the person, their ideas or their opinions, and accept and respect both. Okay? So sometimes this can be a fuzzy area. Any other questions? All right, I have a short video I'd like to play for you. Thank you.
The canvas of God's love is broad. But as Christians exercise the love of God in the world, one common thread holds it all together. The Christian story speaks of a mystery that lies deep in the soul of every human being. In the beginning, God in all his power and creativity reached down to craft a world that reflects his glory. By his word, he spoke the planets into existence. But with his hands and his breath, he sculpted men and women unlike anything else. The scriptures tell us that human beings were God's masterwork, and he wrote his signature, set his imprint on the human soul. Humans are created in the Imago Dei, the image of God. We have the ability to create, worship, communicate, reason, and relate. We are capable of love and responsible for our actions. The Christian story also tells us that humankind, created for intimacy with God, rejected God instead. Created to reflect him, we sought to replace him. This sin brought death and destruction into the world. But the fall is not the end of the struggle. For God sent a Redeemer, the perfect image of the invisible God, who took the fractured pieces of our humanity and bound them up, restoring the broken image of God and renewing our lost fellowship with him. This, the image of God, changes everything. It shapes how we see the world and one another, and calls us to honor the image of God
Will the
in
school nurse
everything.
please call the main office?
Christians work to alleviate poverty, disease, and starvation because even the poorest of the poor are created by God in the image of God. Christians work to rescue and rehabilitate abducted and trafficked girls and boys because there is no such thing as a disposable human being created by God and in God's image. Christians fight abortion because children created by God in the image of God should not be terminated and discarded, and because mothers created by God and in God's image deserve our care. Christians uphold the dignity of the elderly and disabled because all who are created by God in his image are fearfully and wonderfully made and dear to him. Christians work on behalf of all immigrants because they too are created by God in the image of God and should be welcomed as we would welcome Christ. Christians work for religious liberty because the freedom to follow one's conscience is part of what it means to be created by God in the image of God. Christians work for the flourishing of marriage because it's an instrument of blessing for women and men created by God in the image of God and the essential building block of a flourishing society. Christians work for racial unity and reconciliation because all people created by God in the image of God share something much deeper than skin color. In short, there has never been a human being who was not created by God in God's image. And that's what animates everything we do, the common thread that holds it all together. God's image compels God's children to love all people. The world is broken. We yearn for the day when Christ will make all things new. But for today, we do what we do. We strive for justice and dignity, liberty and flourishing, because every person who bears the stamp of God matters to God and matters to us.
All right, any questions? Thank you for the clap. I think that sums up the Imago Dei pretty well. So hopefully you enjoyed that. All right, we'll move on to our next topic, which is happiness. Okay? Happiness. And we're going to try to understand happiness in light of the moral life, right? So, how would you define happiness? What do you think happiness is? Think about it for a moment. What is happiness?
A feeling.
Okay, a feeling. What else?
A desire.
A desire. Okay. A desire or a feeling for what? Like, if you say a feeling, it's a feeling of what?
Joy.
of joy, right? You wouldn't want to feel sad, right, if you were happy. How else would we define happiness? Happiness is not falling out of your chair when you're sleeping.
Unity as a gift.
A gift, okay. Okay, a feeling of euphoria. When the world talks about happiness, how would the world define happiness? What do you think? Like the people that we live in, if we were not in Mr. Boyno's class right now at Berks Catholic, and somebody came up to you and said, "What is happiness?" How do you think we would define it? What do you think?
Living a stable life with good relationships.
Okay, so living with good relationships.
Well, at least in this modern world and society, people misplace happiness with things like money.
Okay, so money can make us happy, right? Whatever makes you feel good about yourself is what brings you happiness. Anything else that the world would say happiness is? Yes.
Kind of like a fulfillment of something you desire.
Okay, a fulfillment of something. Good. So when we look at worldly happiness, we recognize that the world tells us that happiness is when we feel good about ourselves, our achievements, and our status, right? We're happy when we recognize that I feel good about myself today, or I am, 30th in my class, I'm part of the National Honor Society, and I'm a great athlete, or my status. I'm on student council and everybody respects me, or I'm on the football team and everybody respects me, or I'm on the, I cheer or play basketball, or I'm the star of the chess team, or whatever it might be, and everybody has to respect me, and that makes me happy, right? But more so than just feeling good about yourself, your achievements, and your status is also pleasure, right? The world would tell us that pleasure is happiness. Reward, somebody said money. So sometimes we boil down happiness to what we are owed, what something or someone owes us, right? We've done this and now we deserve this in return. And when we get that in return, it makes us happy. Sometimes just accruing a bunch of wealth can make us happy too, right? When we describe happiness, we don't always have to do it in a positive sense. We can say in a negative sense. What do I mean by negative? Well, a positive would be, saying something, defining something positively is saying what it is. Defining something negatively is saying what it's not. So happiness in the negative sense is, is a lack of suffering, a lack of sadness. Right? You wouldn't say that someone is happy if they're suffering or they're happy if they're sad. Right? We can also define, the world also defines happiness in a comparative sense. So happiness is being optimistic rather than being pessimistic, right? Happiness is, according to the world, is looking for the bright side of things, or, the glass half full as opposed to half empty. These are all ways that the world, the society that we live in, would define happiness. And if we're honest with ourselves, which is always good to be honest, especially with ourselves, most of us have probably bought into this idea of happiness, right? What can we do? What can we get? Who can we be? What pleasures can we bring to ourselves? How much money can we make? I don't deserve this. I don't deserve that. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to be sad. And I'm going to, force myself to always find the good in something, even if it's not really there, right? So I give you here what I would consider two examples of worldly happiness. Who is the guy on the left? It's funny because as I'm getting older, I'm beginning to realize that you don't all probably know who he is. Most of you do. Some of you just don't want to say because then you're going to be like, oh, how do you know who he is? Right? But who is Hugh Hefner? Right? He's the owner of Playboy. So he started Playboy magazine. He owns Playboy Mansion. Right? He's got more women and more money than anybody could ever need in life. Okay? And per worldly standards, I mean, I'll give it to him that the robe he has on is probably worth more than my car. So like that's kind of, that's cool. But besides that, right, what he has, and the status that he has, and the money that he has, and the women that he has, he measures up pretty good in worldly happiness. Wouldn't you agree? If we're going to say happiness is pleasure and wealth and money and status, he's pretty good. How about our friend to the right? Right, Floyd Money Mayweather. Right, who is Floyd Mayweather? A boxer. Probably one of, if not arguably one of the best boxers alive right now. Some of you would disagree. Some of you would disagree. Right? But when it comes to him not running his mouth and just boxing, his record speaks for itself. Regardless of what you think of him as a person, he's a pretty darn good boxer as it comes to boxing. But what's the problem? Floyd Mayweather, that's all he does is run his mouth. He's arrogant. Right? He's arrogant, he's cocky, he's loaded. He is loaded with money. I mean, he is obsessed with money. So much so that one of his nicknames is Pretty Boy Money. Right? Like that's his money is his go-to thing. He's worth millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. Same thing as Hugh Hefner. He's got more women than he ever needs. He's got bigger houses, faster cars. He's got it all. Right? And in earthly standards, worldly standards, he's a happy person. I mean, they're both smiling, right? They both seem to be happy, right? But when we talk about true happiness, let's look at what some other individuals have to say about what happiness is, right? I don't want you to write the quotes down. I'm going to put some stuff on the board that I'd like you to write down instead, okay? So we're going to summarize the quotes together. So the first quote. Happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. Who is Aristotle? Who was Aristotle?
Philosopher.
A philosopher. Is he before Christ or after Christ? Pre-Christian, right? Way pre-Christian. Ancient philosopher. For us as Catholics, he's a pretty important philosopher because most of our ethics is built on his philosophy, right? We're Aristotelian in our ethics. So Aristotle, way before Christ, recognizes that happiness is the purpose of life, it's our aim, and it's where human existence ends, where it stops, right? Way before Christianity, way before religion as we know it, Aristotle, a philosopher, recognized that happiness is the purpose of life, the aim and end of human existence. Okay? In the Catechism, the Church says something similar. The desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to himself. Only in God will he find the truth and happiness. He never stops searching for God. Right? So this same idea, happiness, is what we are aimed towards, what our goal is oriented.
Why is it that line there?
It's like an end.
Okay.
Right? So like, all right, start and stop. Like in math, I hate math, but this is one of the benefits of math. That was 0, and this was 10. We would stop at 10. How about Augustine? Who's Augustine? He's a saint, yes. What do you know about Augustine?
He wasn't a very good guy when he was younger.
Right, he was a pagan. He grew up, his mother was a Christian. She prayed for him every day, and it took him a very long time to become a Christian, but once he did, he turned his life around completely 180 degrees, and now is a doctor of the church. Right? What does Augustine say? We all want to live happily. In the whole human race, there is no one who does not assent to this proposition, even before it is fully articulated. So again, Augustine says, and we're going to put this here as well, that we all assent to it, we all strive for it, and eventually we want to achieve it. Okay? And then we have Thomas. Who is Thomas Aquinas? Right, we know him from the 5 ways. Who was he, though, as a person? He was a philosopher, right? He built on Aristotle's philosophy. But more than a philosopher, he was a theologian, but he was also a priest, right? And Aquinas, he's famous for his 5 ways, but he's famous for a lot of other things. And what does Thomas say? God alone satisfies. So Thomas takes it a step further. And we say this: God alone satisfies. Anything that we strive for in this world that is good, like beauty and truth and goodness and justice and dignity, happiness, ultimately it's all oriented towards God. And God is the only person, the only one who can satisfy our longing for that. Okay? Now, what's interesting, I think it's interesting at least, when we compare worldly happiness with Christian happiness. What is worldly happiness concerned with? Okay, the here and now. What else, though? More so than even the here and now.
From the individual's pleasure.
Right, the individual's pleasure, good, but even more than the pleasure, what else? We had to give a one-word answer. Worldly happiness is concerned with more than money. More than the material stuff. More than fame.
Ourselves.
Good. Worldly happiness is concerned with me, right? How do I feel? How do I look? What status do I have? What can I accomplish? What do people think of me? How can I be a better person? How much money can I have? How much pleasure can I have? Right? On and on and on and on and on. Worldly happiness is concerned with the me, with turning on me. What's interesting is that Christian happiness is the exact opposite. Right? What is Christian happiness ultimately oriented towards? Not just others, but specifically God. So while the world is telling me this, as a Christian, if I'm trying to achieve happiness, I'm being called to move away from myself and ultimately towards God. Right? This causes what we call in the world tension. Okay? And the good news is tension can be very helpful. Right? Think about the Golden Gate Bridge out in Sacramento? In Sacramento? San Francisco. I've never been on the West Coast before. Right? But out in San Francisco, right? How many of you have seen a picture of the... Have any of you been to the Golden Gate Bridge before? You've been there? Right.
Full House.
You've seen it on Full House, and now the new Fuller House is coming out, the spin-off of Full House. My sister-in-law, sorry. But if you've seen the Golden Gate Bridge, it's not just a bridge that you drive on, right? Like the bridge isn't just a flat part. What else is part of the bridge? Shh, pay attention. When you get this question on an exam, you're not going to know what to answer, and then I'm going to have to say, well, you were talking. Right? There's these big, long wires that are part of the support of the bridge. And those big cables are under so much tension. Well, that's a bad thing. Why? It's a bad thing because if there's too much tension, they can snap or break, and then the whole bridge crashes down. But if there's not enough tension, as soon as you even put weight on the bridge, or the bridge by itself would just collapse and fall down. So without tension, that Golden Gate Bridge could not operate and function the way it was intended to be. Right? And in a certain sense, it's true for us in the moral life. We're going to run into a lot of tension. We shouldn't just dismiss the tension, right? We're going to have to work through it. We're going to have to question where it's coming from and what causes it. But there is a tension between worldly happiness, which is focused only on the me, and Christian happiness, which is what we should all be striving for, which is focused on God. All right? We should be able to recognize that there's a tension between this me and God and figure out how we can resolve it to some degree. Okay? The last thing I want you to do is to just take a look quickly at the slides. Okay? Two individuals that most of you are either familiar with or have heard of. Blessed Mother Teresa, which she'll soon be Saint Mother Teresa, right? And Pope St. John Paul II. Why do you think that I would consider these individuals examples of true happiness, as opposed to Floyd Money Mayweather and Hugh Hefner? Why do you think? Okay, they both did things for others, but don't you think it's kind of interesting? I don't know how much you know about the two of them, but John Paul II grew up in an area in Poland, well, the entire country really, which was under a communist regime, right, after World War II. Priests were killed by the communist, by the Soviet Union because they didn't want religion in communist Poland. He was ordained underground, none of his family and friends could be there, and yet he still went through with it and became a priest, right? By worldly standards, that doesn't sound to me like a happy thing or a happy person. Why would you want to have to hide the ordination and then be a priest, and at any moment know you could be killed for just being a priest? Right? Think about Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa lived and worked in one of the poorest countries of the world, in Calcutta. At one point in her life, she even doubted whether or not God was real, if he existed, because he seemed so far away. Working with the poorest of the poor, having nothing, and at one point even questioning if God existed, if God was there with her, and then. That doesn't sound like happiness to me, if we're going to measure happiness based on just what the world says. And yet, I would say that both of these individuals are examples of true happiness. Why? Ultimately, they were concerned about God and less about themselves. All right? Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next Thursday.
See you guys.
Yeah.